Okay, so you know how sometimes like you get really interested in, those periods in history where it seems like just everything was clicking?
Yeah,
Like just tons of creativity and innovation. And I know you are particularly interested in exploring India's golden age.
absolutely.
And what makes that period, so captivating, especially when you think about all the incredible architecture that came out of it.
Yeah. I mean, the term golden age,
Yeah.
when it's applied to India, it often makes us think about like the Gupta, the Pallava, and Chalukya dynasties.
Right.
And, while we often associate, these periods with political stability and economic prosperity, right?
Hmm.
It's the artistic and cultural flourishing that was happening during that time that is just exceptional.
Right.
And architecture is a fantastic lens, I think, through which we can really understand this period.
Hmm.
It really does embody the spirit of the age.
I think that's a great point, and it's something I'm excited to dive into with you today. So basically, we're going to be looking at, the monuments, the structures that were left behind by these major kingdoms like the Guptas, the Pallavas, the Chalukyas,
Right.
and also, kind of look at some of the other interesting architectural things that were happening in other parts of India at the same time.
Hmm.
And I guess the goal is to really try to understand the significance of this moment
Yeah.
in terms of architecture,
Hmm.
pinpoint any key innovations, and hopefully, fingers crossed, have some of those like aha moments along the way.
Absolutely. I think that's a great plan.
Okay, so how should we go about this? I mean, I know we have some great historical accounts that really, offer rich details about these kingdoms, their rise to prominence, and their immense, cultural contribution.
Yes. And you know what I find so striking when you look at the architecture of this period is the sheer diversity of styles
Right.
and also the the multitude of influences that are at
Hmm.
play. It wasn't a single unified movement. It was very vibrant
Yeah.
and just a really evolving collection of ideas.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so let's journey back to the beginning with the Gupta dynasty,
Okay.
which held sway from, the 4th to the 6th centuries CE.
Hmm.
The sources describe them as incredibly effective administrators, almost like a second wave of Mauryan rulers
Yeah.
who brought together a lot of previously warring kingdoms.
Right.
And I feel like, that kind of widespread stability would naturally pave the way for, other areas like architecture to really take off. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think political and economic stability almost always create like fertile ground for cultural and artistic growth.
Right.
Samudragupta, for example, significantly expanded the Gupta territories,
Right.
even venturing as far south as Kanchipuram.
Wow.
And the reign of Chandragupta II is widely regarded as a true cultural zenith.
Hmm.
Sanskrit literature, poetry, even early stirrings of scientific and mathematical thought were flourishing during this time.
And so this period also marks a real resurgence of Hinduism,
Mhm.
especially, when we consider that Buddhism had been so prominent under the Mauryas before that.
Yeah.
How did this, shift in religious focus manifest itself in the architecture?
That's a really crucial point to consider. The renewed prominence of Hinduism directly fueled a really significant increase in the construction of temples
Okay.
dedicated to Hindu deities like Shiva, Vishnu, and Durga.
Right.
And what's fascinating to observe is the very evolution of the temple form itself. Early Gupta temples tended to be relatively simple structures,
Hmm.
often featuring flat slab roofs, and
Okay.
sometimes even carved, from a single block of stone.
So almost like they were just starting with the foundational concept.
Precisely. But then we start to witness this gradual emergence of a superstructure directly above the Garbhagriha.
The Garbhagriha.
Yes, that inner sanctum, the very heart of the temple where the primary deity resides.
Mm.
It's almost like, the most sacred room in a house.
Yeah.
And this is where we begin to see this shikara appear.
I
But
bet-
that very distinctive, curvilinear tapering tower that really becomes like a hallmark of Hindu temple architecture.
Right.
Interestingly, some sources suggest that the form of the shikara may have actually been inspired by the visual lines of bamboo structures.
Huh.
Those naturally tapering shapes kind of translated into stone.
That's such a vivid image, taking inspiration from something as common as bamboo and turning it into these monumental, enduring forms.
Yeah.
So where can we see some of the earliest examples of these, developing shikaras?
Well, the Vishnu temple at Tagawa in Madhya Pradesh is a strong candidate for one of the earliest expressions of this emerging shikara form.
Okay.
And following that, we see, further development in temples like those at Bittargaon
Hmm.
and the Dasavatara temple at Deogar in Uttar Pradesh. That Vishnu temple at Deogar, by the way, is particularly noteworthy for its incredibly lively and detailed relief carvings
Oh, wow.
that really bring the narratives to life.
That's awesome. So we're tracing this progression from relatively modest flat-roofed structures to these much more elaborate temples crowned with these towering shikharas.
Right.
But the Gupta era wasn't solely about Hindu temples, right? The sources also highlight rock-cut cave temples
Yes.
and the ongoing influence of both Buddhism and Jainism.
Absolutely. While Hinduism was clearly gaining momentum,
Yeah.
Royal patronage and popular support still extended to other faiths.
Right.
The Udagiri caves in Madhya Pradesh, for instance, are home to a colossal and very impressive image of Vishnu,
Okay.
which illustrates, the interesting interplay of religious themes within the Gupta context.
Hmm.
And then, of course, you have the iconic cave temple at Elephanta, not far from Mumbai,
Oh, yeah.
renowned for its awe-inspiring three-headed Shiva statue.
Oh, Elephanta. Such an incredible site. And speaking of incredible sites, the sources also bring up Ajanta and Ellora.
Yep.
So while Ajanta is primarily Buddhist, famous for those, breathtaking murals depicting the life of Buddha,
Right.
Ellora showcases a mix of faiths, including that magnificent 8th century Kailashnath temple carved by the Rashtrakuta dynasty.
And what's particularly interesting here is the timeline.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
while the Gupta period lays this foundational layer,
Yeah.
in temple architecture and artistic expression,
Right.
these rock-cut sites, especially Ellora, demonstrate the continuous evolution of these artistic traditions across successive dynasties.
Okay.
Ellora caves, 1 through 12, for example, are predominantly Buddhist monasteries, or viharas,
Okay.
meticulously carved directly out of the rock face.
So even as the Gupta Empire was flourishing in the north, there was a significant amount of independent, architectural and artistic activity happening in other regions of India.
Yes, definitely.
The Deccan South India saw the rise of other powerful kingdoms like the Vakatakas, the Chalukyas, and the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan. And then you have the Cholas, the Pallavas, and the Pandyas further south.
Right.
So it sounds like there was this, widespread surge in architectural creation all across the subcontinent.
Precisely. And, these regional powers made substantial contributions to the artistic landscape in their own right.
Right.
The sources even point to a remarkably detailed fresco painting of Shiva dating back to the 8th century in the Kailasanatha temple at Kanchipuram,
Oh, wow.
which was under Pallava rule at the time.
Okay.
And this really highlights, the interconnectedness of artistic developments and the sharing of ideas across different parts of the subcontinent.
Which segues perfectly into talking about the Pallavas,
Yes.
who rose to prominence in the 6th century, establishing their rule over northern Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh.
Right.
With Kanchipuram as their capital, they sound like a very dynamic and forward-thinking group, actively supporting everything from music and literature to expansive maritime trade.
Yes, they were indeed a significant power, and their patronage of the arts was very extensive.
Yeah.
And, their strong maritime links potentially reaching as far as Southeast Asia
Wow.
likely facilitated, this exchange of new artistic and architectural concepts. And interestingly, the Pallava ruler, Mahendravarman II, underwent a conversion from Jainism to Hinduism.
Really?
And he's actually credited with commissioning some truly unique and early rock-cut temples.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And then, of course, we have Mamalapuram,
Yes.
founded by Narasimhavarman in the 7th century. The sources paint this really vivid picture, of this landscape that's just dotted with massive boulders,
Right.
which became this, dramatic backdrop for some incredible architectural achievements. Can you tell me more about what makes Mamallapuram so distinctive?
Well, what truly sets Mamallapuram apart is this extraordinary combination of freestanding structural temples,
Yeah.
built brick by brick or stone by stone,
Yeah.
alongside these incredible monolithic rock-cut shrines carved entirely from single massive rocks.
Wow.
You have the iconic shore temple standing right at the edge of the sea, a true jewel of early South Indian temple design.
Right.
But then you also have the Pandavarathas, these 5 monolithic structures, each carved to resemble a different type of chariot, and named after the 5 Pandava brothers from the Mahabharata.
So they carved entire temple forms out of single rocks.
Yeah.
It's hard to even imagine the amount of effort that must have gone into that. And the sources suggest these rapas were inspired by the forms of rural wooden shrines.
Yeah, that's the prevailing theory. They appear to represent early architectural styles.
Yeah.
Perhaps originally built from wood and other perishable materials,
Right.
and now translated into this, enduring stone.
Yeah.
And then you have these truly spectacular bas-relief carvings etched onto the surfaces of giant boulders,
Wow.
showcasing the unparalleled skill and artistry of the Pallava stone carvers. It's almost like an open-air gallery of their incredible craftsmanship.
That sounds absolutely breathtaking. A
Yeah.
real testament to their ingenuity.
And then we move on to the Kailasanatha Temple in Kanchipuram built by Rajasima.
Yes.
This is described as a prime example of an early structural temple that really embodies the emerging South Indian style.
Mm-hmm.
What are the key architectural features that we start to see taking shape here? Well, this temple marks a really significant step, I think, in the evolution of South Indian temple architecture.
Okay.
It's here that we begin to see the development of, key features that would become characteristic of the region, like gopurams.
Gopurams?
Yes, those towering and ornate gateways that mark the entrances to temple complexes,
Right.
along with walls adorned with pilasters, a pyramidal shikara rising above the main shrine, and a defined enclosing wall that demarcates the sacred space.
Okay.
It's really a foundational blueprint for many of the later great South Indian temples.
So this is where we can really start to identify, the distinct architectural language that we now associate with South Indian temple design.
Precisely.
Mm.
And Kanchipuram itself blossomed into a major center for temple construction during the Pallava period,
Okay.
with other notable structures like the Kamakshi Temple, famous for its 4 vibrantly colored gopurams,
Wow.
and the very unique Vaikuntha Perumal Temple dedicated to Vishnu and featuring 3 separate sanctums stacked one above the other. It really illustrates the Pallavas', willingness to experiment and develop their own distinct architectural vocabulary.
Yeah, it really shows that they were pushing the boundaries there. Okay, so we've seen the Guptas laying that important groundwork,
Right.
and the Pallavas developing this unique South Indian style.
Mhm.
Now let's turn our attention to the Chalukyas, who rose to power in the Deccan around the mid-6th century.
Okay.
The sources describe them as initially local chieftains who grew into a major regional power,
Mhm.
under rulers like Pulikas II, even establishing diplomatic connections with Persia.
That's right. Their reign was remarkably long, spanning some 5 centuries.
Wow.
And they left behind an incredible architectural legacy with magnificent temples in their capitals at Badami and Patadakal, as well as at Aihole in modern-day Karnataka.
Okay.
And what's particularly fascinating about the Chalukyas is the way their temple architecture evolved over time. They initially drew inspiration from Gupta shrines,
Mm-hmm.
but gradually developed a distinctive style that skillfully blended elements of both the northern or Nagara and southern or Dravida architectural traditions.
So they were almost like architectural bridge builders, synthesizing these different regional styles.
Exactly. And their early phase, particularly evident in Aihole and Badami, clearly demonstrates this transition.
Okay.
The sources note that early Chalukya craftsmen in Aihole seemed to be almost emulating the forms of rural structures,
Huh.
perhaps even the layout of a village council gathered on a platform.
Wow.
The Ladkhan Temple in Aihole showcases some of the basic elements of a Hindu temple,
Okay.
including a sanctuary, a mandapa or assembly hall, and a portico.
So it sounds like they were really in the process of defining and refining, the standard temple plan.
Indeed. And the 7th century Durga temple at Aihole is particularly intriguing because its overall plan resembles that of a Buddhist Chaitya hall,
Oh, interesting.
using stone in innovative ways for pillars and flat roofs.
Okay.
It wasn't until later in their architectural development that shikaras became a more prominent feature in their temple designs.
Huh. Okay. And then we have the cave temples at Badami, carved into those striking red sandstone cliffs overlooking the lake.
Mm-hmm.
That must have been a pretty dramatic and inspiring location for such monumental work.
It is. You ascend these steep steps to discover, these beautifully carved cave temples.
Wow.
Each one typically includes a pillared veranda, a columned hall, and the inner sanctum housing the deity. What's particularly noteworthy here is that you find temples dedicated to both Hindu deities with impressive carvings of Vishnu and Shiva,
Right.
as well as Jain temples reflecting the religious landscape of the time.
Yeah.
The sources even highlight a particularly fine relief carving of a seated Vishnu from one of these Badami caves.
That's so cool. A real confluence of religious expressions carved right into the natural landscape.
Exactly.
And the sources also mention the Bhutanatha group of temples situated around the same lake,
Yes.
which exhibit the typical pyramidal tiered towers characteristic of the Chalukya style.
Right.
But they also feature a superstructure that hints at early South Indian architectural forms.
Right.
It's like they were actively borrowing and adapting ideas from different regions.
Precisely. It's a clear illustration of that, cross-pollination of architectural concepts and influences.
Yeah, I love that. And then we move to the mature phase of Chalukya architecture at Patadakal in the 8th century. This
Yes.
was a significant sacred complex comprising 10 temples that were primarily used for royal ceremonies and functions.
Hmm.
And it perfectly exemplifies that sophisticated blending of Dravida and Nagara styles.
It does.
So at Patadakal, you could literally see both northern and southern architectural vocabularies being used side by side.
Absolutely. The Virupaksha and Mallikarjuna temples at Patadaga are outstanding examples of the Dravida style,
Okay.
with the Virupaksha temple bearing a striking resemblance to the Kailasanatha temple at Kanchipuram, showcasing that direct influence.
Oh, wow.
And then right within the same complex, you find more modest temples built in the Nagara style, particularly around the entrance.
Okay.
It's almost like a living museum of the architectural trends of the era.
Yeah, it's truly remarkable how these different dynasties, while maintaining their own distinct identities, were clearly aware of and influenced by each other's, architectural innovations and developments.
Hmm.
Now, the source also touches upon what was happening in West India, the Deccan and Bengal between the 8th and 11th centuries,
Yes.
mentioning the rise of powers like the Pratiharas, the Rashtrakutas, and the Palas.
This period saw a kind of fragmentation of larger empires. And the emergence of these significant regional powers.
Yeah.
The Pratiharas, a Rajput clan, held considerable territory in West India,
Okay.
while the Rashtrakutas dominated the northern Deccan.
Right.
And their rock-cut Kailashnath temple at Ellora remains a monumental highlight of this period.
Yeah, for sure.
In the east, the Pala dynasty, who were patrons of Buddhism, held sway.
Okay.
And these powers were often in competition, particularly for control over the strategically important city of Kanash.
Right.
And the source even mentions a notable 10th century Pratihara stone relief from Allahabad, depicting Shiva and the Saptamatrikas, the seven mother goddesses.
So it sounds like a complex period of shifting political landscapes
Yes.
and diverse regional artistic expressions.
What else?
And then we arrive at the Chola dynasty in the late 10th to 13th centuries,
Right.
who truly established themselves as a major military, economic, and cultural force, spanning across much of Asia.
Indeed. Under visionary rulers like Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola,
Right.
the Chola Empire experienced significant territorial expansion
Okay.
and exerted considerable influence across the region. And their architectural contributions are equally grand and ambitious.
Yeah.
The Brihadeeshvara Temple of Thanjavur, completed around 1009 CE, perfectly embodies the grandeur of the Chola style.
Okay.
Constructed from massive granite blocks, it features a towering 13-story shikara that soars to almost 70 meters in height,
Wow.
adorned with intricate sculptures and moldings. And the sources emphasize its remarkably balanced proportions and its sheer scale.
That sounds absolutely monumental.
Yeah.
Like a true feat of engineering and artistry. And it was primarily dedicated to Shiva, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
The source also mentions the elaborate gopuram that marks the entrance to this vast temple complex.
Yes. The Gopuram itself is an imposing structure,
Right.
leading into this extensive sacred space dedicated to Shiva. And Rajendra Chola, the successor of Rajaraja, also undertook the construction of a similarly grand temple at his new capital, Gangaikonda Kolapuram.
Wow.
And what's particularly noteworthy about Chola temples is that they evolved beyond being solely religious structures.
Okay.
They became complex institutions that played significant political, fiscal, and cultural roles within the community.
Wow. So they weren't just places of worship.
No, they were really the vibrant heart of the community's life.
Yeah.
And the inner shrines of these temples housed exquisite bronze sculptures of various deities, considered masterpieces of Chola art.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. Finally, the source touches upon other interesting regional architectural developments between the 8th and 11th centuries,
Yes.
particularly in Kashmir and Orissa.
Even in these geographically distinct regions, we see the emergence of unique and characteristic architectural styles.
Right.
In Kashmir, the impressive Temple of the Sun at Martand showcases distinctive Hellenic-style columns,
Oh, okay.
a testament to cross-cultural interactions,
Right.
along with pyramidal roofs and arches.
Okay.
And in Orissa, especially around Bhubaneswar, the Shikara form developed its own unique profile,
Oh, wow.
featuring a distinctive shoulder spire that gracefully converges towards the circular kalasha or crowning stone at the very top,
Huh.
as beautifully exemplified in temples like Parasarameshwar, Mukteshwara, and the magnificent Lingaraja temple.
It's just incredible to grasp the sheer diversity and the level of innovation that was happening across the Indian subcontinent during this golden age. So as we begin to wrap up our discussion, we've really undertaken a pretty comprehensive deep dive into the remarkable architectural achievements of the Gupta Pallava and Chalukya periods, haven't we?
Absolutely, I think so.
We've explored this fascinating evolution of temple forms, the
Hmm.
emergence of distinct regional styles, and, the significant interplay of various religious and cultural influences.
And this golden age was a period marked by profound innovation
Yeah,
and just exceptional artistic excellence.
right.
And the architecture that survives from this era
Yeah,
serves as a tangible and, I think, awe-inspiring testament to that.
definitely.
Tells a very compelling story of flourishing kingdoms,
Yeah.
deep religious devotion, and just the incredible skill of the artisans and builders.
Absolutely. And hopefully for you, our listener, who is curious about gaining a thorough understanding without, feeling overwhelmed,
Right.
this deep dive has provided a well-structured and insightful overview of what can be a complex topic,
Mm,
offering those satisfying aha moments as
yeah,
you've connected the dots.
definitely. And it prompts a thought. Considering the sheer variety of architectural styles and the evident cross-cultural influences we've uncovered,
Yeah.
what profound insights might these ancient structures offer us
Mm-hmm.
about the interconnectedness of ideas and cultures within the region during this, celebrated golden age?
That's a wonderful, thought-provoking point to consider. Or perhaps if these monumental structures were designed to inspire awe
Right.
and forge a connection between people and something far greater than themselves.
Hmm.
What modern equivalents do we see in our own world today?
Right.
And what do those structures communicate about our contemporary values and aspirations? Definitely something for you to continue to explore.